It's looking good for Dukakis in Wisconsin tonight. Meese gets some help, and a major drug lord is arrested in an international undercover operation.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. In the ever more dramatic campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis appears to be getting a boost from Wisconsin tonight. Based on information from an NBC News The Election Day poll and other sources, Dukakis should win Wisconsin, beating Jesse Jackson, who received a surge of attention in the closing days of the campaign. However, in the Colorado caucuses, the outcome still is not entirely clear. Those caucuses were completed last night, but there's been a very slow count of the results, and it does appear to be very close between Dukakis and Jackson. NBC's Dennis Murphy is in Wisconsin tonight.
Jesse Jackson looked exhausted this morning at his final stop here. A flat performance before a small crowd at an auto plant targeted for closure.
If we can work out a formula to bail out Kenosha, we can bail out America, and that becomes our challenge.
Jackson was angry about the Colorado caucus process. He called it inept and accused the state party chairman there of not playing by the rules because he endorsed Dukakis.
And so a state chairman should not do that because that in itself is biased, politically, and it's unethical.
In Boston, Dukakis denied Jackson's claim.
To the best of my knowledge, it was run efficiently and well, and people had a full opportunity to vote and participate.
While the two leaders talked about Colorado, Wisconsin was voting. The Jackson campaign took 88-year-old Angie Blaylock to the polls, as they did hundreds of other elderly voters.
You need to go and vote! Please go and vote!
A Jackson sound car roamed Milwaukee's Black North Side, getting out the vote. Dukakis volunteers worked a phone bank looking for last-minute support. They were encouraged by reports of preliminary Election Day polls showing Dukakis doing well. It's a high-stakes drama, with those who turned out by the thousands for Jackson's impassioned speeches actually vote for him and keep him on a roll going into the crucial New York primary. Can Dukakis get his campaign back on track by finally winning blue-collar voters outside of New England? Can the cool governor sideline Jackson's Charisma Express? Al Gore, touring a New York City runaway shelter today, spent the most money in Wisconsin, where he had hoped a good showing would give him a boost in New York. He'll spend $1 million there. The pros say it's Gore's last chance to stay viable. And Paul Simon hints that this may be his final contest this season. He says he'll reassess his chances when the returns come in. But for Dukakis and Jackson, Wisconsin isn't do or die. It's one stop in a grueling marathon, with New York the next big contest 2 weeks from today. Dennis Murphy, NBC News, Milwaukee.
And if all of this holds up and Dukakis does defeat Jackson in Wisconsin, it should help the Massachusetts governor as he moves into New York in 2 weeks, Pennsylvania in 3 weeks. John Chancellor has been looking at the NBC News Election Day poll to see why voters were making their choices. John, what'd you find?
Well, we're still polling, as you know, Tom, but so far we find that Dukakis' support is not very solid. Many of the Dukakis voters wish other candidates were running on the Democratic side. On the other hand, sizable numbers of the Dukakis voters think that he will be the nominee, and he will be the strongest Democrat, they believe, against the Republicans. Jackson picked up many white votes, 3 or 4 times as many white votes as he did in 1984 in Wisconsin. He's getting almost all the black vote, no surprise there. And black Democrats in Wisconsin are 5% of the total, so that he's picking up a lot of white votes. Dukakis and Jackson are splitting the blue-collar vote, the liberal vote, and students, but Jackson is picking up a lot of white professional and managerial voters. Not a majority, but a sizable share. Gore is doing well. He was helped by his TV ads, I think, because late deciders came to him. And George Bush is also running in Wisconsin, doing well, very well liked, but his support is not strong.
On the Democratic side, there was so much attention for Jesse Jackson going into the final hours of Wisconsin. What are the results today, based on what we're seeing in terms of how the voters made their choices? Tell us about what may happen in New York and Pennsylvania.
Well, I think Jackson can now argue that he is still expanding his base of white voters while holding on to his core support of black voters. I think that Dukakis can say he's finally won a primary in the North outside of New England, and I think Gore can hang in there. We're going to have a very interesting primary in New York.
It's going to be interesting when we get to these 2 big industrial states, New York and Pennsylvania. On the Republican side today in Wisconsin, no surprise, as John indicated. A big victory for Vice President George Bush, who now is effectively without opposition for the Republican presidential nomination. In Washington today, Attorney General Edwin Meese announced that he has found replacements for those vacancies created last week when 2 key aides abruptly resigned their top Justice Department jobs. The number 2 man at Justice and an Associate Attorney General quit because they were concerned about Meese's continuing legal difficulties, and it took the Attorney General a couple of tries to find replacements. John Shepard on the right and Francis Keating were named by Meese today. Shepard, a former president of the American Bar Association, will be the number 2 man now at Justice, nominated by Meese, and Keating, who's now at the Treasury Department, is in line to become the number 3 man, still to be named head of the Criminal Division. Meese is scheduled to leave tomorrow for Central America on an inspection of drug enforcement procedures. Also coming up here tonight on NBC Nightly News, Lisa Myers with a special segment report on a federal investigation into whether Pat Robertson's organizations illegally mixed church, campaign, and cash. There was a dramatic capture today of one of the world's most notorious drug lords, Juan Ramon Mata. He's a Honduran with ties to Colombia's infamous Medellin cocaine cartel. There's much mystery remaining about how and where he was captured, but it is known tonight that he is now being brought to the United States. As NBC's Richard Valeriani reports now, Mata is wanted in this country for murder.
Members of an elite Honduran army unit known as the Cobras struck before dawn. They surrounded and searched Mata's luxurious, heavily guarded compound in Tegucigalpa and said they found a bag of cocaine. Mata's wife, Nancy, protested that the drug had been planted by the searchers. Mata himself was seized somewhere else. It's not clear where, and he's now being brought to this country by federal marshals. Nor is it clear how he was turned over to the U.S., since there's no extradition treaty with Honduras. American officials describe Mata as a major figure in the cocaine traffic between Colombia and the United States. They say the largest coke shipment ever seized in this country, 8,000 pounds in Miami last year in hollowed-out furniture, came from Mata. His trademark white Mercedes is well known in Tegucigalpa, where he's lived since reportedly paying $2 million in bribes to get out of a Colombian jail in 1986. His personal worth is estimated at $2 billion. Mata is wanted in the U.S. in connection with the 1985 murder of American anti-drug agent Kiki Camarena in Mexico, and he faces a number of drug charges as well. Because of Mata's links to high-ranking Honduran military officers, American officials say he had the run of the country and conducted his drug operations freely. But now, American law enforcement officials speculate that the Honduran military, stung by widespread reports of their involvement in drug dealing, went after Mata to show that there were no Noriegas in Honduras. Richard Valeriani, NBC News, New York.
That was a reference, of course, to Panamanian strongman Manuel Noriega, who's been heavily involved in drug smuggling. Today, National Security Advisor Colin Powell admitted that U.S. economic sanctions have not been enough to force Noriega out. Powell said the administration is considering seizing tax payments made by U.S. businesses in Panama, as well as political and other military options. In the meantime, the first of 1,300 more American troops left for Panama today, another signal to Noriega. Among them are military police who would evacuate American civilians should that become necessary. Noriega's government continues to claim that the United States is preparing an invasion of Panama. And hijackers in Iran tonight are threatening to blow up a Kuwaiti Airlines jumbo jet with 112 people on board. They warned that 3 of the passengers, members of Kuwait's royal family, face imminent danger unless Kuwait frees a group of pro-Iranian prisoners. Also on board, an Egyptian with a U.S. passport. NBC's Peter Kent has details on this hijacking today.
The passenger jet was refueled soon after it landed, but Iranian authorities refused permission to take off, apparently responding to a request by the government of Kuwait. It isn't known how the hijackers got their pistols and grenades aboard the flight from Bangkok to Kuwait. They seized control of the 747 over the Persian Gulf and ordered it to Tehran. The pilot, pleading a shortage of fuel, was allowed to land at Mashhad. During the day, the Arabic-speaking hijackers' only message was that the aircraft would be destroyed if anyone approached. This evening, the hijackers issued a statement demanding the release of 17 terrorists jailed in Kuwait since 1983. The 17 were imprisoned for a series of bomb attacks on the U.S. and French embassies in Kuwait, as well as several Kuwaiti installations. Today's incident is similar to the 1984 hijacking of another Kuwait jetliner. The hijackers then, too, demanded the release of the same 17 terrorists. Kuwait refused, and 2 American passengers were murdered. That 6-day siege at Tehran airport ended when Iranian commandos stormed the aircraft and released the passengers. Tonight, the hijackers released a 42-year-old Jordanian who complained of heart problems. Diplomatic relations between Iran and Kuwait are almost non-existent because they're on opposite sides of the Gulf War. Iran's parliamentary speaker, Rafsanjani, says Iranian officials will try to end the hijacking, but that if they fail, the hijackers might be allowed to leave. Peter Kent, NBC News, London.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, Israeli soldiers shot and killed 2 Palestinian guerrillas today as they tried to slip into Israel from Lebanon. Israeli radio said the guerrillas intended to take civilians as hostage. It was a gun battle. 4 Israeli soldiers were slightly wounded in the shootout. Secretary of State Shultz had a very busy day today trying to sell his Middle East peace plan. He was shuttling between 3 countries. No progress was reported. First, there was a meeting in Jordan with King Hussein, a meeting described only as useful by a State Department spokesman. Shultz then went on to Syria in a meeting with President Assad, who told Shultz that a Middle East peace agreement must include an Israeli withdrawal from all occupied territories. Tonight, Shultz is back in Israel. In Northern Ireland today, Congressman Joseph Kennedy was touring Belfast when he got into a shouting match with a British soldier. Kennedy's car had been stopped at a checkpoint, and when the soldier grabbed his arm, Kennedy demanded to know, "Since when do you tell anybody what to do?" The soldier told Kennedy to go back home, and the congressman responded, "You go back to yours." Tonight, Evan Mecham is the former governor of Arizona, the impeached governor. He served as Republican governor for 15 months, but last night the Arizona Senate found him guilty on 2 impeachment charges. NBC's Don Oliver has more on this bitter battle.
I, Rose Mofford.
Former Secretary of State and acting Governor Rose Mofford became Arizona's new governor today.
This is a day that I will never forget for the rest of my life, and for that I thank you.
Her job will not be easy. To get this state's government working again after more than a year of turmoil and uncertainty.
Evan Mecham is convicted of high crimes, misdemeanors, or malfeasance in office.
By an overwhelming vote, the Arizona Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, convicted Governor Evan Mecham and ordered him out of office.
Your veracity and your ethics, particularly in government, are in a state of bankruptcy.
Mecham is the first governor of any state to be impeached from office in 59 years.
I think that what was done had to be done, but it's a tough call, it really is.
I just think that the state has gone through enough. It's been unproductive, and we are crippled.
The troubles of Governor Mecham have paralyzed the state government and polarized the citizenry. Callers to radio talk shows have been bitter.
I don't believe that Governor Mecham was the horrible creature that they tried to paint him as.
Mecham still faces a criminal trial on charges he tried to hide a large campaign loan. And there is the possibility he may run for governor again in a scheduled recall election next month.
I don't have an announcement to make today.
Arizona's Attorney General says Mecham is not eligible to run again.
Once you're impeached for your term, which is not up till 1990.
Through it all, the former governor remains unrepentant and has never conceded doing anything wrong.
This is just another chapter in a book, and this book isn't near the end.
Don Oliver, NBC News, Phoenix.
Soul singer James Brown turned himself into police today in South Carolina to face a charge by his wife that he had tried to kill her. Brown denied the charge. He was released on bond of $15,000. His wife of 8 years, Adrienne, told police that Brown fired 3 shots into her car while she was inside and then beat her with an iron pipe. Brown said he never laid a hand on her. He said they argued because he's leaving Thursday for a South American tour without her. Are there lean times ahead for Americans? A panel of scientific experts today urged the federal government to help us cut down on fats in our diet. As NBC's Robert Hager reports tonight, the panel's report called for changes in federal regulations to make meat and dairy products leaner.
The Academy of Sciences panel said although consumers are beginning to get the message that consuming less fat and cholesterol is healthy, government grading regulations work against this and are badly outdated. The study found the Agriculture Department's system for grading beef and lamb actually encourages over-fattening the animals. That system was designed years ago, based on the principle that fat meat is juicier and more tender. The fatter cuts are graded prime and choice and tend to bring the farmer more money. Panelist Gary Smith of Texas A&M says this needs changing.
if we could do away with the disincentive or create a disincentive for overfattening, more producers would in fact make their animals leaner.
Similarly, the group said the Food and Drug Administration forces producers to turn out sausage, bologna, mayonnaise, and other products with a government-required percentage of fat. With less fat, they'd have to be labeled imitation and no one would buy them. The panel said that, too, needs changing. The panel said other labels stores put on products, such as light or lean or natural, ought to be defined by the government so consumers know what to make of them. Panelist Timothy Hammond.
We think we're on the eve of producing animal products with vastly superior nutrition and health characteristics, and we think that shoppers would be ready to vote with their dollars for these kinds of changes.
For instance, the group said livestock could be left on the range for longer periods and spend less time in feedlots, or could be given natural growth regulators to inhibit fat. And meat could be graded by ultrasonic scanners, which could precisely determine the percentage of fat. As to the old notion that meat tastes better when it has more fat, the Academy of Sciences group said that recent studies demonstrate that differences in taste are less than one might expect. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Another story of science, a kind of scientific miracle. The Binder twins, Patrick and Benjamin, soon will be leaving Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore and returning home to West Germany. Now they can each sit on the lap of a parent, and that is a minor miracle. When born, they were Siamese twins, joined at the back of their heads, and to separate them, a team of 70 surgeons and technicians had to work for 22 hours. And although their services were donated, the care still cost the twins $800,000. Special segment tonight, church, campaign, and cash. Did Pat Robertson's organizations illegally mix the three in his drive for the Republican presidential nomination? Robertson's campaign, of course, for the nomination fell well short, but as NBC's Lisa Myers reports now, an Internal Revenue investigation continues.
We are together going to restore the greatness of America through moral strength.
Day after day, Pat Robertson lays claim to the moral high ground.
We must use scrupulous honesty. The American people are looking for integrity.
Robertson never mentions an investigation by the Internal Revenue Service into whether money from his religious empire, the Christian Broadcasting Network, was improperly used for his presidential campaign. The investigation focuses on a tax-exempt organization founded by Robertson and funded mostly by his ministry. It was called the Freedom Council.
That's been operating now for about 5 years to bring about prayer, education, and action.
The publicly stated purpose of the Freedom Council was to get Christians involved in politics. But a number of former Freedom Council officials say its real mission was to get Robertson into the White House.
The entire process was to create a launching pad for Pat Robertson's bid for the presidency.
With the knowledge of Pat Robertson?
Oh, with the knowledge of Pat Robertson.
Pat was at the top of the Freedom Council as well as CBN, and whatever he wanted to take place took place.
The problem for Robertson at CBN is that it's a violation of federal tax laws to use charitable tax-exempt funds for political purposes. And Robertson poured as much as $8.5 million of his ministry's tax-exempt money into the also tax-exempt Freedom Council. Dick Menard was executive director of the Freedom Council in 1985 and 86. He later joined Jack Kemp's campaign.
Introduce Dr. Pat Robertson.
I was a conduit in spreading his word and his charade to hundreds of people around this country to get involved in the Freedom Council for a legitimate cause that turns out wasn't a legitimate cause.
Jerry Curry was president of the Freedom Council during that time.
You have to come to the conclusion that more and more you are becoming, whether you want to or not, a cover of some kind for Pat Robertson's campaign.
Ministry monies helped pay for Freedom Council rallies around the country, rallies which provided a political springboard for Robertson.
Looking to run.
The question became a political battle cry.
You tell me, what do you think? Let me ask you here in Michigan, should I do it or should I not?
Curry says that as the campaign neared, the offenses grew. He left in April 1986 after repeated battles with Robertson.
I felt we were crossing the line. I just was uncomfortable with it.
Greg Jackson took over as executive director when Curry and Menard left.
Often, the expenditures included things that we questioned and sometimes were blatantly political activities on the part of the staff in Michigan.
Jackson says that when he questioned what he considered political expenditures, he was overruled by Robertson himself. Some of the Freedom Council money also was used to pay staff in Michigan and other key states until they could join Robertson's campaign.
I felt that was inappropriate. The paycheck at that point should not have been coming from the Freedom Council.
And political victories by the Freedom Council should not have been presented as personal victories for Pat Robertson, a point sometimes forgotten by Robertson himself.
As far as I can tell now, delegates representing me have won the 7th.
Delegates representing me, Robertson said, even though the Freedom Council was prohibited by law from supporting any candidate. That Freedom Council victory in Michigan in August 1986 began to put Robertson on the political map. His critics say it should not have been even partly financed by CBN.
Something like 600,000 people contribute each year to the Christian Broadcasting Network. They're giving as to the Lord for its evangelistic and charitable purposes. And they did not give for his personal presidential race.
Pat Robertson agreed to, then canceled, 2 interviews with NBC News. In September of 1986, after learning of the IRS investigation, Robertson shut down the Freedom Council. If that investigation concludes that funds were misused, CBN could lose its tax-exempt status. And if that misuse was deliberate, Robertson could be subject to civil and criminal penalties. Lisa Myers, NBC News, New York.
Robertson told a Denver audience on Sunday that the Lord has a plan for him to run for president again in 1992, saying out of the defeat this year, there is the foundation for what he called a great victory for the nation. That's not the news for this Tuesday night. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you tonight at 10:55, 9:55 Central Time for a special report on the Wisconsin primary. See you then.